Welcome to this build guide for the Quad 2 Input Logic Gate module. As a PCB and panel project, it comes with a choice of 6 panels, which correspond to the 6 different logic operations it's capable of, because it is compatible with multiple different logic ICs from the 4000 series. So depending on the IC that you put in it, it can be a NOR gate, an XNOR gate, a NAND gate, an AND gate, an XOR gate, or an OR gate. Also included in the PCB and panel project are these standoffs and screws. The rest of the components are fairly common, and the majority of you will probably just have some to hand, but if you're unfamiliar with them, I'll quickly run through the bill of materials and give you some detail. This bill of material can be found in the build document, which is linked below, and we'll be referring to that throughout the whole video, so it's good to follow along with that as we go. In the folder of module documents online, you'll also find a dedicated bill of materials with extra hyperlinks to these products, though I only intend that to be a guide to the components. It's not necessarily the cheapest or most convenient option for you. You need to shop around. For this build, the tolerances and quality of the components isn't really much of an issue. Really, if you want to do this cheaply, you can get away with getting most of the stuff off eBay. So starting off with the resistors, I've spec'd 1/4 watt 1% tolerance metal film resistors, but like I said, you can get away with carbon resistors which have a lower tolerance, just as long as they are 1/4 watts. The ceramic capacitors, which you can see here, these little yellow blobs, don't necessarily need to be the multi-layer version, but they do look nice. The thing to bear in mind with the electrolytic capacitor, which you can see just here, is that it needs to be under 10mm height so that it will fit between these two PCBs, and it needs to be rated to at least 16 volts. For the male single row headers, they normally come in big long strips like this, and you just break off as many as you need. The same goes for the double row headers used for the power cable, but I would advise getting proper 6-pin female headers instead of cutting them from a longer strip. And remember, you need to select one of these logic ICs depending on which operation you want to do with the module. You're going to need some basic tools, some snippers to cut off the legs of the resistors and that, some pliers to do fiddly jobs that you can't do with your sausagey fingers, a flathead screwdriver for the little M2 screws, obviously some solder and a soldering iron, and it might be handy to have one of these hex sockets for the jack nuts. So an overview of the PCBs and panel. There are 3 PCBs. They're referred to as the front, the mid and the back PCBs, and they're all labelled on their right hand side, just like that. And it's very important to pay attention to which side of the PCB you need to be soldering the components onto. As you see them now, with the majority of the silkscreen symbols for the components, these are the top sides of the boards. If you flip them over, you'll see the big hack logos. These are the bottom sides, and you need to be careful not to get confused between terms like top and front. This is the front board, and this is the top of the front board. This is the bottom of the front board. Similarly to the back, this is the top of the back board. This is the bottom of the back board. If you're following along with the build document, which I recommend, then all of those terms are capitalized and in bold, so you can't miss them. Trust me, you don't want to be trying to desolder something that you've put on the wrong side of the board, especially these headers here. There is a rectangular silkscreen outline on the side where the component lies. Don't worry, we're going to walk through it very methodically, so you shouldn't be able to mess up. So we're going to start with the backboard. Let's put the rest to the side for the moment being. If you've never soldered before, I recommend checking out the Adafruit Guide to Excellent Soldering. There's a link below. So to make things easy, we're going to start with the smallest components, which are these BAT42 diodes. All of the diodes in the project are BAT42 types. There's only one diode on the back PCB, and you need to be really careful because it has to go in the correct way round. if you look on here, you'll see there's a black stripe on the left hand side of the diode. That needs to match up with the stripe on the silkscreen symbol. And you'll notice on all of the polarized components with 2 legs, there's 2 different shape pads. There's a square pad and there's a circular pad. The square pad is the anode or positively charged leg, and the circular pad denotes the cathode. Make sure that the leg nearest the stripe on the diode is going through the circular pad, because it is the cathode, the negative leg. All you need to do is fold the legs on over, just like that. Make sure it's the right way around, pop it through the holes so it lies down on there, and it should lie flat to the PCB like that. We turn it over and solder the legs, and then clip those suckers off. Now, top tip here, if you clip with the end of the clippers, it's going to ping off like that. But if you clip a bit further down, you'll be able to grab it and then put it in the bin that way, so you don't have to step on it later and swear at the top of your lungs. So the next smallest component that goes on the backboard are all the resistors. You can tell the resistors because it's this shape symbol and they have an R reference number, and if you look at the bill of materials, they all match up to here and tell you what value resistor they are, though it is written there on every one, so you shouldn't have to refer to the bill of materials unless you're in trouble. All of the resistors on the backboard are 10Ks, and it doesn't matter which way round these resistors go in, they're not polarised like the diodes. After you've soldered the resistors in, it should look like this, all flat to the PCB, nicely like that. Next to do is the IC socket, and you need to make sure that this little indent at the top matches the indent on the silkscreen symbol. Goes on that way. Now we're going to do the ceramic capacitor C2, and it doesn't matter which way round you solder this one in. Now we have 4 of these transistors to put in, and as they come, the legs are all very close together, and it's a bit difficult to get them in that socket, so you need to bend them out. I'll show you the best way to do that. Take one leg, bend it out about that far, take the leg on the other side, bend it out to about there, then take your pliers, grab it around about there, bend it down, and you've got a nice little angle in it there. Do the same with the other leg and it will slot nicely into its socket. You also want to make sure that it's going in the correct way round. Match the flat side of the transistor to the flat side on the symbol. Now we're going to do the electrolytic capacitor, and you have to make sure that this one goes in the right way round. The long leg is the positive side, and on the negative side you can see it's got a negative stripe on the body here. And if you look at the PCB, you've got a plus sign there with the square pad, that's where the longer positive leg goes through, and the negative stripe goes to the negative stripe on the silkscreen symbol. Push it on down and solder it in. Now we're going to turn the board over to the bottom side and solder in the power header. Good tip if you're taking it from one of these longer strips is don't snap it off, twist it, and it will come much cleaner. Just a few times, there you go, you can twist it off. Press it on in there and it will hold itself in place while you solder. Just make sure that it's on the bottom side, and you want to make doubly sure that you haven't bridged any of the solder connections. Now we're going to insert the logic IC into the socket. I've got an XOR gate here, and you want to make sure with the IC that the little indent at the top here is aligned with the indent in the socket, and the silkscreen symbol goes in this way. And if you've got a new IC, the legs might be splayed out a little bit, so what you do is just lie it on its side on a flat surface, lever it over a little bit until the legs come into line, and then it will slot down nicely into the socket. Just put it in there, bit of even pressure across it, and it will go down nicely. Check that all the legs have nicely gone into their connections. So for now, that is the backboard done. Should look like that. We're going to come back to it later and do the headers and the standoff, but let's put that to the side for a moment and get our mid board. Again, we're going to start with the diodes. Make sure they're correctly oriented with the stripe on the diode matching the stripe on the silkscreen symbol. My tip for these is to put all 8 diodes in, and then it will lie nice and flat for you to solder. With all of those diodes soldered in, it's time to move on to the resistors. Resistors done. Now we're going to solder in the 2 IC sockets. Again, make sure that the notch on the top matches the notch on the silkscreen. With those IC sockets in, the next on the list are the 3 capacitors. These are the ceramic non-polarized type. Ceramic capacitors in, it's time to do the female pin headers, and these go on the bottom of the board, so you need to flip it over and you'll see where they are because they've got the rectangular silkscreen outline. So let's put those in there. They should hold themselves in pretty well. Make sure that the headers are pressed flush to the board so there's no gap in between them. It should look like that, and then we solder them in. Because there's bigger pieces of metal inside here that sink the heat quite well, you may have to hold the soldering iron on there a little bit longer to heat it up enough for the solder to flow nicely. Now we can insert the 2 LM339 integrated circuits into their sockets. Make sure that the notch in the top of the IC matches the notch on the socket and the silkscreen. So don't worry about the male pin headers or the standoff yet, we're going to get to those later. Let's put this mid board to the side for now, and we're going to continue by starting on the front board. Let's start by soldering in all of the resistors. With the resistors in, the next step is to put the 2 female pin headers in the bottom side here, where their rectangular outlines are, and you want to solder them in place. Make sure that they stay pressed in flush to the PCB as you solder them in. Now you want to take an M2 screw and the female to female standoff, put the screw through the hole near the center of the board from the top side, hold it on in there, and then thread the standoff onto it from the bottom side. Make sure that it's nice and tight. Should look like that. Next, we are going to put all of the jacks in, but don't solder them in just yet. They go into the board this way, with the outside ground leg pointing upwards, goes into the pad that's outside of the silkscreen box, just like that. But you will notice that the J, K, L and M jacks don't have a pad for the outside ground leg. That's because you want to cut that one off for only those 4 jacks. Get your clippers and clip it off all the way down at the base there. And then, very important, it has to go in the same way as the others. So if the ground leg were there, it would be pointing upwards. You must get that the right way round. Now, the reason why we cut those legs off of the jack sockets is to make way for the LED indicators, and they have to go in the right way round. After all, they are diodes, just light emitting ones. You can tell the positive leg because that's the longer leg, just like the electrolytic capacitors, and the positive leg goes in the square pad, and you can see there's a little positive sign next to it. So just drop all 4 LEDs through and let them rest there for now. Check them on the back, make sure all the long legs are pointing the way they should be. Now we're going to take the panel and place it on over the jacks. Thread the nuts on all of the jacks securely. Be careful not to over tighten them. You can use these hex sockets to put them on, only do it finger tight. Now you can put the panel and front board assembly down on a flat surface and press down just to make sure all of the jack sockets are seated in there flush to the board. Now you can solder in all of the jack sockets. Next, we need to manoeuvre these LEDs into their panel holes, and you want to make sure that they are flush with the panel. So the hole should be pretty tight around the LED, so you should be able to just press it down with a flat surface and it will hold itself in there totally flush. If it's not holding itself in, a little trick you can do is place a piece of masking tape over the hole so that it holds it flush to the panel. Best to just solder one leg, check that it's all good, and then solder the other one. Otherwise it's a bit more difficult to adjust it. You also want to be careful because a couple of the legs are quite close to the headers, so just be careful not to melt any of the plastic. So now it should look like this. Now we're going to connect this with the midboard that we did earlier. On the midboard, you now want to insert these two male headers on the top side, but don't solder them in just yet. Then you can go ahead and connect the midboard to the front board, connecting the headers together, pushing them into place. Take the male to female standoff and thread it through the hole on the bottom of the midboard into the back of the other standoff. Make sure that's nice and tight. Might want to give it a little turn with your pliers just to make sure it's secure. Then you can solder the male pin headers into place. Now we can connect the backboard with the rest of it. All you need to do again is put the male headers into the top side and make sure you don't solder them just yet. Connect the two together. Then on the bottom of the backboard there's just one more screw that you need to thread in to hold everything together. Make sure that's relatively tight, and you can go ahead and solder the male pin headers in. And congratulations, it is now complete. Let's plug it in and test it. You want to make sure that the red stripe on your ribbon cable is pointing towards the red indicator, because that is minus 12 volts. Another way to tell where minus 12 volts is by this little triangle indicator on the actual plastic header. That goes towards red. So depending on which logic IC you've got in here, you'll be expecting different things on the outputs, and you can refer to the truth tables in the user guide to see what you should be expecting. We've got an XOR IC in this one, so when you turn it on you shouldn't expect to see any lights. Let's have a look. So if I plug a square wave into A, I should be seeing this LED next to it blinking on and off, and there we go. You want to test all the way down to make sure you're seeing the expected results, and if you're not, if you're having a problem, then you can refer to the troubleshooting section on the build document. First of all, check that you've plugged the ribbon cable in the right way. Are all the polarised components in the right way? The electrolytic capacitor, the diodes, the LEDs here, those jack sockets where we cut off the ground lead, all of the ICs, are they in the right way? Are the transistors in the right way too? The standoffs and the panel are used as electrical connections, so they need to be in there and connected. Have a careful look at all of the solder joints. Did you miss one? Is one looking a bit dodgy? Refer to that Adafruit guide to excellent soldering and retouch any of the solder joints that look a bit dodgy. Did you forget to put in a component? In 99% of the cases, that will solve your problems. Unless you've somehow mashed the traces on one of these PCBs, which is extremely hard to do, there should be no reason why it's not working. But even in that worst case scenario, it can still be fixed, so don't worry. If it's late, probably best to go to bed, and it will be clearer in the morning. Trust me. Thank you very much for getting one of these modules. I really hope you enjoy it, and I think it's going to get really interesting when we get a few more out and you can start linking them together and doing really interesting stuff. Alright, cool. I'll see you later.